So, from your chemistry in high school, you will remember about bonds, right? Chemical bonds. Do we remember about bonds? Yeah. So I'd like to start off with refreshing your memory. Anybody remember about a triple bond? Phosphate. Yes, somebody said phosphate. Okay, so we have phosphate here, and it has a -3 bond. It's looking for 3 positives, right? Very strong. I mean, it's out searching. Then we have carbonate, which is -2. It's pretty strong, but not as strong as phosphate. Then we have chloride, which is -1. It will grab a hydrogen if it can, but if not, it's no big deal. So this is really important because here in a little bit we're going to talk about bonds, okay? We're going to talk a lot about bonds, right? So, everybody remember their chemistry from high school? No? Gosh. I would have thought all of us would have. Okay, so let's get to strengthening step families. One of the things about divorces is that for many years, churches did not want to even mention that there were divorced people in the congregation. It was particularly in the fundamental Protestant denominations, they were thought to lower the spirituality, lower the quality, lower the morality in the congregation. So until the 90s, there was really nobody who talked at all about divorces or remarriages. The people who started talking about it were not the churches. They were the counselors, the psychologists who were seeing these people who were struggling in their step families. So most of the material that you will hear today came from resources, all of whom were psychologists and counselors. We need to take this and incorporate it into the churches. It's beginning to happen, but we need to give it a little bit of oomph. So, the goals that we have for today are, hopefully if I can get this to work, to gain insight into step family dynamics. How are step families different? How many of us, are there any step families in here? No? How about anyone who's counseled step families or helped step families get married in the church? Okay, so we all know that there's different dynamics to them, right? We want to determine how we can add value to those couples who are entering into step family relationships. Because the IFL and the convalidation and all the different things that we do now, there's very little information for them. And at the end of today, we will have a presentation that you can take back to your parishes and you can actually use that with your step families. We want to gain knowledge and tools to help couples avoid some of the pitfalls inherent in step family dynamics. Are there some, Mary? There are lots of them. The step family is real family. When people who live within it have information giving them the tools to be effective, the step family offers wonderful potential. And we can verify that. The first few years of our family were struggling. We had to go through family counseling. We just did it all wrong. We brought kids into a relationship together before we really formed them and before we were prepared for some of the dynamics that would happen. So, divorce, non-marital childbearing, cohabitation are reshaping family experiences in the United States. Because of these changes, our traditional definition of families decreasingly capture the social units of interest. So we're going to have some statistics here in a few minutes about how many people actually form step families, how many divorces there are in this country, how many remarriages, and how many redivorces. We've noted how a significant portion of officially defined single-parent families actually are two-parent families and they're unmarried. So a single mom or a single dad may actually have a cohabiter with them, but they're still designated as single families, single parent families in our church logs. That makes sense? Have you seen that? Yep. So until the 90s, there was very little information on step families and the differences between successful ones and unsuccessful ones. Remarriages with or without children were thought to be simply a second chance to be happy after the unfortunate failure of a previous marriage for one or both parties. So, in my particular situation, I came from a divorced family. My father was in World War II. He was a medic. When he came home from World War II, he was ruined. He had to make decisions about whether a soldier lived or died on the battlefield. He was a different person. So I was born right after he came back, but he and my mom were not married very long. So they divorced, and a few years later my mom remarried, and she was remarried until her husband passed away in 1996. So there's so many situations like that for whatever reason, some of them are no faults, some of them are definitely faults, but for whatever reason, this is a growing situation in our environment, in our society today. There are much different social views of marriage, views of divorce, views of cohabiting, and we're going to discuss some of those. But until the 90s, really, there was not much information about that. As more and more step families were being formed, it became obvious that in remarriages where children were involved, there were other dynamics in play. It is a major dynamic. Children are a major dynamic. These dynamics turn out to be a major predictor of success or failure. Now, let me say that again. The relationship of the kids with the step parent, with the other step siblings, is a major determinant of whether a step family will be successful or not. Any questions about that? Does that make sense to you? Okay. Good. There were many assumptions about step families that proved to be incorrect. Love occurs instantly between the child and the step parent. No, doesn't happen. So, sometimes through innocent changes in behavior, in family patterns, stepchildren will not like the new step parent who's coming in. Sometimes the step parents don't like the kids because of their behavior. There's an expectation that because you love your new partner, you will automatically love his or her children, or that the children will automatically love us because we are such nice people. Of course, when we think about it, we recognize that establishing relationships takes time, that it doesn't happen overnight or by magic. Just in a romantic relationship between two people who eventually marry, it takes time to build that relationship. You have to learn about each other. You have to learn about the different attitudes that they have about life in general, about their goals for the future, things like that. So we take time to learn about our potential spouse before we make that decision. But in a step family, everybody's thrown together and there is no time to do that. One of the things we'll talk about a little later is how to build relationship with stepchildren, which is a major factor. Number 2, adjustment to step family life occurs quickly. People are optimistic and hopeful when they remarry. They want life to settle down and get on with being happy. For many people, it's an opportunity to regain what they had hoped for from their first marriage that for some reason or other did not come to fruition. If your hopes or expectation is that once the wedding vows are spoken, life will return to normal, you're going to be disappointed. Because step families are such complicated families, the time it takes for people to get to know each other to create positive relationships and to develop some family history is significant. Usually at least 4 years, and that's typically a minimum. So it takes a while to build these relationships. Children adjust to divorce and remarriage more easily if biological fathers or mothers withdraw. That's a common concept. It'll be easier if time. Maybe for the couple, but not so much for the children. Biologic parents, and they'll adjust better if they can access both. This means they need to be able to see their non-residential parent and to think well of him or her. Sometimes visitation is painful for the non-residential parent, but it's very important to the child's adjustment and emotional health, except in those areas of parental abuse or neglect. It helps if the residential parent and step-parent can work toward a parenting partnership with all the adults involved. So this is one of the things that was an issue in a lot of step families that we counsel, what we worked with before their marriage, was that the ex was a real problem. Now, maybe the ex was a real problem, maybe it was just because the residential parent just didn't want to deal with them because of some of their own issues that they had with them. But it seemed like in a step-family situation where couples were preparing to marry, the ex was a lot of times a scapegoat. And it could be, if it was two divorced people coming together in a step-family, it could be both of them. It could be one or the other. The children can facilitate that if they're old enough to understand and to mediate for the ex. And we'll talk about that here in a bit. Step families formed after a parent dies are easier. I can tell you they are not. My ex-wife passed away. My children were very, very young. And to my daughters, she was an angel on a pedestal. There was no way for Mary to compete with her. So that was a big problem. That was a huge problem. And that was one of the reasons that family counseling was so important for us. And gratefully, it was extremely successful, and now all the parties are happily relating to each other. They're best friends in some cases. So a deceased ex does not make it easier. It actually, I think, makes it more difficult. So how many of you know of a couple where an ex was deceased and the couple remarried? Yeah. How did that go?
Not well.
Not well, yeah. And I think the age of the children has a lot to do with that too. One of the things that statistics show is that the child may love the potential step-parent until the wedding vows. And then it becomes permanent. There's no chance that they can still have their daddy all to themselves. Okay? So, I think that's one of the major factors that happens in the death of a spouse. When the spouse remarries, it's difficult for the kids after the wedding occurs. We have one of our wedding pictures. Is it okay if I mention this? Picture at our wedding, and we have 6 kids, 3 each. All the kids are happy. Kids walked us down the aisle. But in the picture, the family picture afterwards, everybody's smiling except my second daughter. She didn't like it. Now she's one of Mary's biggest fans. But she didn't like that we were getting married, that there was a new person going to come in. And if I can tell something funny, she'll be mad at me, but I'm going to tell it anyway. We first got married. We got back on the honeymoon because I was a single dad and I had a busy practice and kids were in school, and I had a housekeeper who would come in and clean the house for us. We first get back, what do you think Mary did? Fired the housekeeper, which meant the kids had to clean up after themselves. How do you think that went over? Okay? So those dynamics, there are a lot of little intricacies there that can really cause friction, okay, particularly in the beginning. Any other comments about that? Okay. Part-time step families are easier. What do you think about that? Again, it all centers around the children. So relationships take time, and step families where the children only visit occasionally are hampered by a lack of time to work on relationships. If the stepchildren come every other weekend, there's less time for one-on-one time between the stepchild and step-parent, and less time for family activities. Since step families follow an adjustment processes and stages of development, it may take the part-time step family longer to move through the process. So the statistics show that it takes somewhere between 4 and 7 years for a step family actually to become family. A lot of times, in the case of a part-time step parent, a non-residential step parent, there's no time to build that, and that extends it out to the far end of that timeline. So it takes part-time step families longer to move through the process. There's only one kind of family. The step family is going to be exactly the same as a nuclear family. You will be just like a first marriage or biological family. Today there are lots of different kinds of families. First marriage, single parent, foster parent, step families, to name just a few. Each is valuable and has different characteristics. Just because there are two adults in the step family doesn't mean it recreates a biological family. Frustrated when it doesn't happen, at least initially. So there's some other dynamics in our society now. It seems that in the last couple of years I've been working a lot with young women in my counseling. The attitudes of the younger generation now are quite different than what I grew up with. And I have to tell you, I was shocked at some of the things I heard. One of the things that shocked me, I actually had to call Mary's oldest daughter and say, is this true? Because she works in the school system. She's the most amazing person I've ever met. Smart about everything, about life in general. And that is friends with benefits. Anybody know anything about that? So this young girl that I'm working with now, she's a professional woman, professional. She has a guy over, they will watch a movie, have pizza, and then they have sex. No commitment at all, no relationship at all. So sometimes that results in a child. No relationship at all. Another young woman I'm also working with right now, she's 26. She was married, had a child. He's 4 years old. They divorced. She had a one-night stand with a guy from California, had another child. Now dating another guy, and she's wanting to have a child with him. And so y'all help me, because you all are family counselors here. What I'm telling her is you need to think about the role model you are for your children. When they grow up, do you want them to be jumping from bed to bed? You want them to be married, divorced, married, divorced, married, divorced? You want them to cohabit, cohabit, cohabit? What is it you want to project to your children as a model behavior? But it's tough, because all their peers are saying this or that. Yeah? So these new dynamics are coming into play. So a lot of single moms, a lot of single dads, but in particular the ones I work with are single moms, and they cohabit without even thinking about it. You know, they'll have a couple of dates with a guy and then he moves in, or she moves in. So the dynamics of that are changing in the way that we as the Catholic Church need to relate to them. Any thoughts about that? Any questions about that? I know you all have had experience with this. What do you all think? The whole view that young people have now of marriage, of commitment, of a lifetime commitment, they don't buy it. Plus the stuff they see on TV. Married, divorce, hop into bed with somebody you hardly know, hop out, don't even know who the people are. So there's this commitment that's just got a big zero with a cross across it, you know. No commitment. No, don't want to make any commitment. The only commitment I have is to myself. So that's another dynamic that we have to talk about. So let's talk about some statistics.